justice that you have to be a member of the Philippine Bar. And you cannot file a disbarment case during the incumbency of a justice, nor can you file a criminal case before the Sandigan Bayan of any offense which carries with it the removal from office, meaning the only way to address issues of transparency and accountability to justices is through an impeachment court. The President only has a immunity from suit for his term of 6 years, but since the justices retire at the age of 70 years old, they basically have a much longer time of immunity in effect, no? Because of what some people term procedural immunity. And I see the point of this. You cannot see a situation wherein a Supreme Court justice is being tried before the Sandigan Bayan, and then the appeal will be before the Supreme Court. And at the same time, they passed a resolution, and to be fair to this Supreme Court, it was the previous members that basically made it very difficult, if not almost impossible, for anyone to get a copy of the Saan, no? And so, basically, Mr. President, ang sinasabi ko po, with all of these immunities, ang takbuhan lang ng tao po yung impeachment court. Pero kung ang magiging desisyon po ng Supreme Court is that every step of the way, whether pagsusupina ng kanilang records, ng mga tao, etc., ay hindi pwedeng kunin, lalong nasa-strengthen yung kanilang so-called immunity. So, saan katatakbo? Parang may problema tayo, which came first, the chicken or the egg, no? Kukunin mo ba yung ebidensya at kakasuhan mo ba muna siya bago ka dumating ng impeachment? Or pag nasa impeachment na, sasabihin na saan ang ebidensya, magiging technical tayo, and hindi mo naman pwede silang kunin ng witness, hindi mo pwedeng kunin yung records. Samantalang malinaw naman sa lahat ng court rulings abroad na ang judicial misconduct is one of the exceptions to opening up their records, no? Regardless if the case is pending before them or not. The Neri case, which dealt with executive privilege, very, very clear yung umpisa niyang statement. Executive privilege cannot be used to excuse a crime. So I wanted to go into a discussion, Mr. President, an academic discussion rather than a ruling on the points that we have already ruled upon, because of my concern that whatever we do here will set a precedent. No, magiging basihan to ng future impeachments. I hope we will never have to go through this again with any of the other justices. I do know that tama po si Senator Miriam, let's talk about the country, let's talk about the future. Napakahalaga na yung integrity ng Supreme Court intact. Pero Mr. President, yun din po ang sinabi kasi natin sa militar nung sinabi natin wag imbestigahan, sinasabi lang wag imbestigahan si General Garcia, wag pag-usapan ang pabaon, wag pag-usapan ang mga nangyayari. But this actually strengthened the military, and the reforms that came afterwards actually strengthened the military. So I think there are good intentions in asking the Supreme Court to release some of their records or to make themselves subject to this impeachment court. Let me just put on the record, Mr. President, that some of the confusion is because of the name. Ang tawag po kasi natin ay Supreme Court. If we put the name Supreme Impeachment Court, magkakaroon ng context ng konti. Kasi lahat po ng justices, whether collectively or individually, is subject to the impeachment court because they are impeachable officers. Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na pantay natin sila sapagkat lahat ng dapat magsasubmit sa jurisdiction ng court ay mas mababa sa korte. But, Mr. President, this will go into a discussion of the difference between dealing with the Supreme Court itself and members of the Supreme Court. So be that as it may, Mr. President, I was overtaken by some events, and I think we agreed to talk about this in caucus instead. I know it is a very sensitive issue, but let me just reserve some time after our caucus or at the appropriate time, Mr. President, to talk about how the impeachment court can balance these two very important interests. One, which is the respect of a co-equal branch of the Senate, which is the judiciary, not a co-equal branch of the impeachment court. Number two, Mr. President, is the integrity of the adjudicatory process of the Supreme Court, its record, its people, how to ensure that ang justices natin ay protektado at hindi sila yung yunuyugyog o sila ang kinakasuhan or yung independence ng judiciary. Napaka-importante yon. But at the same time, we know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And alam po natin that there can be no person or no branch of government that can have absolute immunity. So, Mr. President, I just wanted to put this on record, and I prepared a legal study and some cases that we researched. But let me stop here, Mr. President, and discuss it in the caucus, and then maybe at the appropriate time we can have a discussion just for the records, as I said, because this will be a precedent, and it will be very, very difficult to impeach a erring Supreme Court justice if these issues aren't resolved. Thank you very much for this time, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr.
Dr.
President,
Florida.
Mr. President, Senator Pia Cayetano is seeking to be recognized, and while she's preparing for that, may I just call the attention of the Clerk of Court to page 54 of the journal, wherein the last line is acknowledged to the Senate President or the presiding